Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today we're continuing our unit on economic and personal finance, our second unit, talking about macro and micro economics. Today we're going to specifically delve more into fiscal and monetary policy basics, which again, it's detail oriented. So let me hop in here and explain to you what this is and how it affects everything in our society. All right, let's get started. So fiscal and monetary policy. I touched on this just a wee bit on the first lesson here because fiscal and monetary policy are very important in how the government interacts with the economy. Next unit, we're going to talk quite a bit about the government's involvement, but when you start talking about macro and microeconomics, specifically macro, and the fact that the money in the United States is backed by the federal government, needless to say, the federal government has a big investment, pun intended, in the economy. Right? The government doesn't necessarily own the economy or some dictator that can force things to happen, but they have some pretty big tools in their toolbox that they can manipulate the economy to keep it consistent and steady, which again is the main priority here in economics, especially in macroeconomics, because a steady economy leads to confidence in the economy and therefore makes the economy even stronger. So let's start out here by talking about monetary policy and fiscal policy. All right. So monetary policy, if you'll remember, refers to actions central banks in America, our central bank is the Federal Reserve, take to pursue objectives such as price stability and maximum employment. So our monetary policy, all right, is really the stuff that the Federal Reserve does, and we're going to talk about that some here today with the monetary policy. And then there's the fiscal policy. The fiscal policy, and while monetary and fiscal don't they both mean money? They do, but it's just how they break it up. Fiscal policy talks about how the government makes money and then what they do with that money. They tax, that's how they make money, and then they spend it, and what they spend it on determines what part of the economy gets a boost in extra financial benefits. So fiscal, all right, the policy, that is, how much you pay in taxes and what the government does with that tax, whether they pay for the military, whether they pay for infrastructure. We'll talk about that here in a second. So the fiscal policy, these are politicians in Washington, D.C. Deciding how to tax American citizens and then what to do with that tax money. Monetary policy is part of the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is a branch of the United States government, not necessarily a whole branch, but it is a subdivision of the United States government. But they have a lot of autonomy to be able to do what their experts in economics feel is best for the greatest good of society as far as when to raise interest rates and how to regulate how much money is in the economy. They fight a lot against stagnant economies. They fight a lot against inflation. So when inflation happens, taxation and stuff like that, while that can help some, the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve and a group of really, really smart people that work for the Federal Reserve determine what's the best course of action to try to stabilize the economy. So monetary policy deals a lot with banks, interest rates and stuff like that. Fiscal policy is going to deal with taxes and things like that. So while the monetary policy is set almost exclusively by the central bank and they do a lot of targeting inflation, fiscal policy is much more broad. Fiscal policy, again, that's taxation, that is taking money in and spending it, and that can be, there's no set real focus, whereas the monetary policy part of the Federal Reserve is much more focused on interest rates and exchange rates and things like that. So, how increasing government spending can help the economy. So, what if we just don't tax anybody and we don't spend any money? That would be helpful. Well, if the government is spending more money, all right, they can focus on areas of the economy in which they need more money. In the Great Depression, the federal government comes out and spends tons of money to build dams, and they built dams in the poorest areas, and by spending a bunch of money in poor areas, to create infrastructure, another thing we're getting ready to talk about. By doing that, it really helped those places have a more stable economy because the dams were creating hydroelectricity. So the government can use tax money to kind of focus on specific areas that are in high need and spend tax money there. That puts money into that economy and helps it out. So government spending can help the economy by focusing money in certain areas. So how the government, specifically the Federal Reserve, lowers interest rates to help out the economy. So this is a look at interest rates, all right? Doesn't mean anything to you. Really, all you need to know is that blue line was going up, going up, going up, and then you see at the bottom that's 2009, and that line goes straight down, all right? Basically, at the very end of 2008, leading into 2009, the interest rate basically hit zero, which means if you took a loan out, you basically only had to pay that loan back, and there was almost no interest, no thank you money. The government does this, or the Federal Reserve makes the interest rates this low when there is a problem with the economy and you need to get more money in the economy. Well, that was a pretty steep drop off there of that interest rate. What happened in 2008 and 2009? Well, here's why they did it. If you see here on this graph, that blue line goes and goes and goes, and you see that big dip where it goes negative 2.6%, and that's talking about our GDP, that's really bad. The housing market collapsed. I mean, it was absolutely pandemonium when that happened, and a lot of our money just went poof gone, all right? It's an oversimplification of it, but there was an absolute crisis happened at the very end of 2008 into 2009. So in order to get more money back in the economy and to stabilize the economy, they dropped interest rates to almost zero. And you can see exactly what happened. Shortly after that, we come back up to where we were. So this has a proven track record, even though it's always controversial when they lower and increase tax rates. But there is a proven track record here of the Federal Reserve. When drastic things happen, they can change these interest rates and it can get the economy back on track. It also helps with inflation. So the question here is, how can increasing government spending and lowering interest rates help stimulate economic growth during a recession? A recession means when things are going bad, and we're actually going to talk about recession and depression here in a minute. But so pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, so let's jump further into fiscal policy. All right, so fiscal policy, if you remember, we just talked about it. This is taxation. This is the federal government taking taxes in, all right, and then spending it. So how much you tax the people, how much money you need, and how much money you're going to spend, that is the fiscal policy, all right? The fiscal policy is very important to the economy for a variety of reasons. Now, taxation in general is necessary for a whole nother set of additional reasons for military and things like that. But as far as the economy goes, and that's what we're worried about here in economics, the fiscal policy is really important to keep the economy stable. Got to be stable. Again, a stable economy leads to confidence in the economy, and people that are confident in an economy, the economy continues to be strong. All right. So here's what the federal government can do. They can either have expansionary fiscal policies, meaning the economy isn't doing great and they need to expand it. So what would they want to do to make the economy stronger and grow? They're going to want to put in more money into the economy. So how does the government do that? Well, they increase spending and lower taxes. So they're taking less money in and spending more money out. Now, that seems like you can't do that. You can't get paid $10 and then pay somebody $20 because you don't have that money to spend them. The government works on a whole separate thing that's outside the scope of this course where they can just do that. And it puts us in debt. It's a whole nother thing. I'm not getting into that right now. But so the government can spend more money than it takes in order to stimulate the economy if it's not doing great. And that's called expansionary fiscal policy. You're expanding the economy. Contractionary. This is a word that you're going to hear a whole bunch in economics. You'll see it on test questions. Hint, hint. Contraction. All right. Contraction means to come in. If the economy is getting smaller, means it's doing more poor. I shouldn't say more poor, but to bring the economy in and make it smaller, the government would do the opposite. They would limit government spending and increase taxes. Now that seems bonkers. When in the world would any government want their economy to do worse? They want it to be stable. If the economy has runaway inflation, there's too much money in the economy, so all the prices are going up and things like that, while inflation is heavily fought with the Federal Reserve with interest rates that we're getting ready to talk about, the fiscal policy, right, because Federal Reserve is monetary policy, the fiscal policy of the government can also combat that by taxing more, which is taking more money out of the economy and not spending as much and basically saving it, and that can help stabilize the economy. So the whole goal is to stabilize the economy, and you can do it with expansionary fiscal policies or contractionary fiscal policies if you're trying to contract the economy. So what in the world does the government spend it on? I had mentioned in the Great Depression, they built dams, all right, which back up water, and then it creates hydroelectric electricity, which by permanently flooding some areas, you basically keep certain areas from flooding. That increases property value when you can control the flooding of an area, and your house isn't going to flood. Also, it creates hydroelectric electricity, so a lot of places that hadn't had electricity before get electricity. That is infrastructure. Infrastructure is basically like tools of society that is used by everybody. That's a simple way of doing it. The government is a big contributor to the infrastructure, and infrastructure helps out the economy. Things like roads, the whole highway system that stretches all across our country, that was created by the federal government with taxpayer dollars, and it helped our economy because it's easier to travel and exchange goods back and forth, drastically increased trade. Airports, ports for like water ports, for like boats, utility companies, railways, education, schools. A higher educated population is generally viewed as a much better environment for business and economy, healthcare, and then even some social stuff like building stadiums and things like that. So this is the stuff the government spends money on. You can almost completely see when governments spend money on the infrastructure, all right, that it does help out the economy. So while here it basically is making the argument that by the time the shovels actually hit the ground, if you're building something, if you're specifically looking at an area to help, by the time the infrastructure actually starts to be built, that the economy is already recovered, you can look at this in one or two ways. Number one, hey, we shouldn't even do it because by the time we actually start building these infrastructure projects, the economy is already recovered. Or you can look at it the more accurate way of the fact that by focusing on this gives people confidence in the economy that the government's involved and they start spending money. They spend money long before those shovels ever break the ground and getting money back into the economy. But the fact that these plans come out increases confidence in the economy, which people confident in the economy leads to a strong economy. So infrastructure is a pivotal aspect of fiscal policy for the government with taxation and expenditures. So the question here is explain why it would be a bad idea for the government to increase taxes, all right, during a recession, all right? So those things would be counterintuitive. Those would be opposite. Explain why that would be bad to increase taxes during a recession. What are you trying to do during a recession, and how would increasing taxes counteract that? So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, monetary policy. So monetary policy, this is the Federal Reserve, all right? So the Federal Reserve, they are focused very, very heavily on inflation. Our inflation rate, all right, the value of the dollar needs to remain constant. And the Federal Reserve is basically tasked with managing that. The big weapon that the Federal Reserve has is the ability to change interest rates. All right. So if inflation is to try to get more money in, it's called the loose money policy, and too much loose money policy can lead to inflation. Whereas if they're super strict and they have super high interest rates and tight money policy, that can lead to a recession if people can't get money to start new businesses and things like that. So the Federal Reserve has to basically be between, don't want to put the economy in a recession, but they also don't want inflation to get out of hand. They want a little bit of inflation, but not enough. So it's a very technical thing, and they do it by controlling interest rates. So if the economy is struggling, all right, one of the things that they do, meaning we're in a recession, is they can lower interest rates. Lower interest rates means it's cheaper to borrow money. This, while it seems odd maybe to us that makes such a drastic difference, corporations and businesses and people that want to start something up, borrowing money is a pivotal part of our economy. You lower interest rates, makes it easier to borrow money. That pours more money into the economy. So the banks lower interest rates. More people take out loans and mortgages. They buy houses. They spend more money. You got to spend money to make money. Leads to more orders and sales, higher demand. When demand goes up, then companies are hiring more people. Lowering interest rates stimulates the economy. Whereas at the same time, you have runaway inflation. There's too much money in the economy. They have to bring increase interest rates so that there's less money going into the economy, and they pull it back to make it stable. A lot of people are unhappy when interest rates get risen because there's less loans being given out, and they're being given out at a higher rate. But it is all to make the economy more stable and consistent. So the question here is, how does lowering interest rates by central banks help stimulate the economic growth? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, so I want to take some time here and be very clear on what a recession and a depression are, all right, in the United States government. So just like sometimes you'll see economic expansion and economic growth, sometimes you'll see recession and sometimes you'll see the word depression, and are they interchangeable? And the answer is, it depends. Depends on the question of what you're asking. So a recession and a depression are both bad, all right? But let's start talking about explaining what economic recession is. So a recession is a significant, widespread, and prolonged downturn of economic activity. The economy gets bad. All right. Now, this is not always like just random acts. There can be a natural disaster sometimes causes a recession, especially in smaller countries. A big hurricane hits a smaller country and really just wipes out a lot of its infrastructure, a lot of its roads, its schools, its hospitals. That is a huge detriment to the economy. And natural disasters are a pivotal cause of recessions in a lot of other places. In America, since our country is so big, it would have to be an absolutely astronomical natural disaster, like half the country have to fall off the earth in an earthquake for a natural disaster to necessarily lead to a nationwide recession. But after like Hurricane Katrina and some of these massive hurricanes, the economy doesn't take off afterwards, definitely. So a recession is a time period in which the economy is starting to do worse than it was previously. Causes are like uncontrolled debt, inflation gets too high, all right? Excessive inflation or deflation. Again, deflation would destroy the economy. We've never really dealt with deflation. The Fed's like number one job, and they're so good at it, we don't even talk about it, is don't let deflation happen. Economic shock, which during COVID, there was a lot of money pumped into the economy with the stimulus checks that really weren't based on anything, and that caused a lot of deflation, but that's also like an economic shock. And psychological factors, confidence. If people lose confidence in the economy, it starts doing poor. So people confident in the economy makes it well. Warning signs is, again, decreased consumer confidence. Money is make-believe. Our economy is make-believe because we're human beings. We created all this. So as long as everybody believes in it, it exists. as long as everybody's confident, that's good. When people stop being confident in the economy, it can start to struggle. Rising unemployment is a sign that a recession might be coming. Drops in stock market. These types of things are signs that a recession could be coming. Now, recessions happen. Recessions come, they go up, they go down. That's how the economy works. Probably the most famous recession, all right, is the recession, and we've already mentioned it today, that started in 2007, but it's more 2008 and 2009, and it's referred to as the Great Recession. The housing market collapsed. The housing market's super simple, trying to explain it right here for this point here. The housing market gave a bunch of people loans they knew could not pay it back. And then when they couldn't pay it back, they just said, fine, we'll take your house from you and we will sell it to somebody else. But then when that happened to everybody and everybody lost their house and nobody could buy it, all of a sudden the banks are sitting here with houses and no money, and all the money went poof gone. And it was all because the banks are really dumb and gave people loans. They gave somebody that makes $10 an hour, gave them like $1 million loan to buy a house, knowing they couldn't buy it back. It was a whole silly thing. It's super shady, actually, if we went down that road. But when that happened, all this money went poof gone in our economy, and our GDP plummeted. All right, so we aggressively fought with the Federal Reserve, fiscal monetary policy, and aggressively fought. So by like 2012, we were kind of getting our head above water, like, okay, we can recover from this. All right. It was so severe and so extreme of a recession that we didn't want to just call it like a normal recession, because it was really rough there for a handful of years, that it's referred to as the Great Recession. All right. Now, you might be thinking, well, I was kind of thinking that a depression was worse than a recession, so why would that not be called a depression? Very good question, because we're going to talk about that. And you are right, a depression is worse than a recession, so why is this called the Great Recession and not just, hey, it was the depression? We're getting ready to talk about that. So the question here is, explain what a recession is and why it is viewed as bad. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, economic depression. So a depression, and you're probably thinking about depression, and you're probably thinking about the Great Depression, which is exactly what that means. So what's the difference between recession and depression? You might be thinking the Great Depression in your mind, and that's completely fine, because that's the one we're going to talk about, and it's really the main one that we need to reference here, because so the Great Depression happened in the 1930s, where the stock market collapsed, all the money went away, and for like 10 years, the entire economy was just an absolute shambles. All right. So the reason that's a depression, but what happened in 2007, 2008, 2009, like 2012, that's called a recession. All right. There's a couple key terms that talk about the difference in that. Number one is if you lose 10% or more of the GDP, that's considered a depression. All right. We did not lose 10% in the Great Recession. We definitely lost that in the Great Depression. The biggest one here is the length of time. The Great Depression lasted a decade. All right. It actually lasted from October 29th, 1929 at the stock market collapse to December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese, and then all of a sudden all our businesses opened back up because we had to have people work overtime who couldn't find jobs to make war materials. So a lot to do with the severity of losing 10% of your GDP while simultaneously lasting longer. So let's look at the Great Depression here to give you an example of how it's different from a recession. So famous picture here from the Great Depression, just absolutely for a decade, it was pandemonium. It looked like maybe American capitalism had failed. All right. We ended up coming out of the Great Depression with very heavy fiscal policy. All right. There was absolutely monetary policy because the Federal Reserve had to come up with the FDIC, insure money in the banks, give people confidence in the banks. That was monetary policy. Fiscal policy was the federal government spent a ton of money that we didn't have, went into huge debt for this, to create a lot of infrastructure in the 1930s to help get America back on its feet and getting more money pumped back into the economy. So this here, all right, and it is not a super extreme line here. It's the red line that we're looking at, all right? And on the years down here is from 1900 to 1945. Look specifically here in the 1930s, all right? You can tell that red line goes up, 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 and then it goes down. That is a huge bad sign, and it stays down and does not get back up to the 1930 level until 1941. So for 10 years, we were in negative GDP based on what we had been prior. The fact that it was 10 years is the main reason that this is a depression and not a recession. So to show you, going back to the recession, this is the red line is the one that you need to look at here. So the red line is let me rephrase all this. The blue line is the Great Depression, and there's two sets of numbers here. And they're basically overlapping the same time frame from 2007 to 2012, and then the Great Depression. So you can tell they both start off the same way. They both collapse. That's how severe the housing market collapse was. It was the same as the stock market collapse. It was catastrophic. And then as the Great Depression, when they tried to get out of it, they just couldn't get out of it. And that was the big fear in America at the time. But notice that red line. That red line comes out and then just keeps getting better and gets back up to its normalcy by about 2012. The fact that that red line is down and then goes right back up, that's why it's a recession. But it was such a steep recession, all right, that it is referred to as the Great Recession. Whereas the blue line, you can see that the economy struggled, was way below 100% for most of the 1930s. The length of time makes the Great Depression the Great Depression. The fact that it was just as extreme, but they come out of it, that's why what happened in 2007 to 2012 is called the Great Recession, is because of the time difference. The Great Depression is longer. So the question here is, give one similarity and one difference between a recession and a depression. And that's what I got for you guys today. See y'all tomorrow.